Our tips are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and we're here to talk about the irrefutable proof that Barret is goddamn dead. Okay, not really. But we are here to revisit the Barret is dead theory, something I said we'd do 2 videos back in terms of the FF7 Rebirth stuff. It was the Root video where we also talked about the Marlene shit. And I said I wanted to kind of revisit the Barret is dead theory because with the Rebirth trailer, obviously, there's a lot of debate on what's happening at the beginning of the trailer, but at least on surface level, we're seeing what appears to be our characters dead, injured, whatever. It's just really interesting to go back to like old theories whenever you get stuff like this, right? Because it adds just that level of credibility to these old theories about, you know, particular characters being dead. Again, I've talked about it a few times on the channel. Aerith being dead. Like, that's been a hot theory for a long time with the ending to episode intermission. Since summer 2021, when Zack walks in the church and sees all the people crying, they're like, maybe Aerith is dead. Maybe that's what they're doing. They're crying, they're mourning, whatever. And then we, you know, 2 years later almost, we get a trailer for FF7 Rebirth, and we have what appears to be dead characters. So it's just interesting. So this theory actually goes back a little bit longer than I realized, because I wasn't sure exactly when we talked about it. I just knew we talked about it on the channel at some point. The Reddit post has since been deleted, which sucks. But luckily, you still have the comment section if you wanted to reference that. I can still link to it. But I did show it off in my video, so we can still reference the post itself, which is nice. But when I look down in the description of the video, like, I uploaded that video in August 2020. That's almost 3 years ago. That shit is haunting my dudes. Time is going by way too fast. So we're actually going to read over this theory a little bit because we didn't do that with my original video. We just kind of discussed it. So we're just going to skip right to the parts that matter. So it says, this post will be operating from the belief that the ending established an alternate timeline. The ending established that this alternate timeline has major divergences, namely Zack and Biggs and possibly Jesse being alive. However, I think there's also another difference that wasn't as obvious. Barret is dead. In the ending to the original Final Fantasy VII, Marlene is in Elmira's house and has a moment where she senses Aerith. So we actually have to pause there really quickly. Everything they're saying does matter and it still is accurate for the most part, but just that at the end of the original FF7, Marlene's not in Elmira's house, she's not in Aerith's house, she's actually in Calm. Because if they were in Elmira's house, they'd be in Midgar, where like the meteor and the red tornadoes are like destroying everything, right? So that obviously isn't the case. You actually see a shot from like Calm looking over at Midgar getting destroyed and shit. I mentioned this too because they mentioned more than once that in the OG FF7, Marlene's in Elmira's house, and I figured we'd get it out of the way, talk about it, discuss it, move past it. And we continue. In the ending to the original Final Fantasy VII, Marlene is in Elmira's house and has a moment where she senses Aerith. She's just sitting at a table, senses her, says, "The flower girl," and runs to the window to look out. Aerith is obviously part of the live stream at that point, so that seems to hint at Marlene having some kind of ability to sense the live stream and the souls within it. In the remake's ending, this moment from the OG ending is recreated. Like the OG, Marlene is in Elmira's house. Like the OG, she's upstairs. This time she's watering flowers and is called by Elmira. Marlene turns and starts to walk away from the window. Then something catches her attention and she looks back at the window. This time she says "Daddy" and runs back to the window. So we have 2 scenes framed very similarly, where the only major difference is that she refers to Aerith, obviously dead in the first version, and Barret seemingly alive in the second version. I think this is hinting that in the same way she sensed Aerith's presence in livestream in the OG and reacted to it, she sensed Barret's presence in the remake. The Whispers are created by the planet, so they could be repurposed souls of people who died and returned to the planet, and thus the destruction of the Whispers and the gold snowflakes in the air could be akin to sensing the live stream. They mask this hint by cutting to Barret reaching out to Marlene, making it seem like they both just have a connection to each other and are thinking about each other. But I think that was a clever way of hiding the fact that they jumped from the alternate timeline in Marlene's scene to the prime timeline in Barret's scene. Plus, it makes sense that killing the Whispers could lead to Barret's death in the alternate timeline. He was stabbed by Sephiroth in the remake and was only saved thanks to the Whispers' intervention. So if the Whispers no longer exist, then the alternate timeline could include him being stabbed to death by Sephiroth in the Shinra building. Obviously, we'll have to wait for future parts to see how these changes ultimately affect things or how this alternate timeline gets woven into the story, or even if there is an alternate timeline at all. But TLDR, I think the ending to Remake established an alternate timeline where Zack is alive, Biggs is alive, but Barret is dead. Sorry if this is something that has already been discussed before, but I searched and couldn't find any other discussion about this. What do you guys think? Is there an alternate timeline, and is Barret dead in it? So I just want to read all that to just kind of get it out of the way since we didn't do it in the original video, but also just kind of get their entire thoughts out there. Now, another thing I would disagree with is that in the alternate timeline, it would still play out the same where like Barret's stabbed by Sephiroth in the Shinra building but dies this time. Like, I would say I disagree with it to a certain degree because of the trailer that we have now. Like, we've seen our what appears to be our group dead or something, and they're all together, right? It's not like Barret dying individually by himself in the Shinra building because he gets stabbed by Sephiroth. But also, if there is an alternate timeline where things are different, then the events of like Remake and OG FF7 wouldn't play out. Because for starters, like, we see Zack potentially alive and saving Cloud, right? Cloud wouldn't go on to meet Tifa and join up with Avalanche, and the events of FF7 wouldn't happen. So there would be no time that like Barret was in the Shinra building to be stabbed by Sephiroth, essentially. Like, they'd probably go down a similar trajectory because Avalanche would still exist and want to do similar stuff, but we only go to the Shinra building to save Aerith, right? That's the only reason we go there. As for, like, the theory overall itself, it's not super complicated. It's just about, like, the ending of Remake with Marlene mirroring the ending of original FF7 with Marlene, where she senses somebody, right? At the end of the original FF7, she senses Aerith. Aerith is dead at the time, but we see, like, her conjure up the live stream to help Holy, so, like, Marlene could sense her presence or whatever the hell. And at the end of Remake, we get a somewhat similar scene where she senses Barret, and she even goes and, like, looks out the window like she does at the end of the original FF7.
Daddy?
The thing is with Marlene, there's a lot of unknowns, right? We just don't know what's going on with her. They've always hinted at her having some sort of ability or powers or something. Since the original FF7, they also touched on it a bit, I think, with, like, Advent Children. There's something in that movie. I haven't watched the movie in a long time. But there's something, I think, maybe towards the end of the movie, maybe in the church with the water or the rain or whatever. There's something along those lines where they kind of hinted at her having some sort of ability. Maybe she senses Aerith again. I don't quite remember. And then at the end of Remake, of course, they hint at it again with her sensing Barret. And at least with, like, if we're basing off the original game, she senses a dead person. I don't know what else she's going to be sensing there. Why does she sense her father? There's something there, right? Even if you think, like, you know, nothing's changing with the Remake story, like, it's going to be OG FF7, why is she sensing her father? There's a reason for that, and based off the original game, it's her ability to sense a dead person. Kind of popular theory that maybe, like, Marlene is ancient or Cetra or whatever the fuck, and a lot of people write that off, but I think it's entirely possible just because everybody talks about, like, Aerith being the last known Cetra, or possibly the last Cetra. We don't know shit about Marlene's mother, right? We don't know shit about Eleanor. Maybe Eleanor was like a descendant of the ancients too, and I'm not, maybe not to the degree that, like, Aerith is, because Aerith is, like, part Cetra, and her mother, Ifalna, was, like, a full-blooded ancient, right? But maybe, like, Eleanor was, like, a descendant, like, several generations down from, like, not even, like, a full-blooded ancient. Maybe, like, Marlene just has that little tiny bit of, like, ancient blood in her that gives her some sort of ability. There's magic in this world outside of, like, materia, right? Because, like, Reeve has, like, that whatever fucking ability he has that they just give him for no reason. We don't know why he has that. Where he can just put, like, life into inanimate objects, right? So maybe, like, Marlene has, like, some sort of either latent ability, or maybe she's just part Cetra or something. I don't know. We just take this, like, theory from a couple years back and put it into, like, the new trailer. We're seeing what appears to be our dead characters. And then even before we ever got the Rebirth trailer, it was a kind of popular theory that in this alternate timeline, the Terrier timeline or whatever, that a lot of our characters would be dead. That's been a theory for quite a long time. I don't think we've ever really talked about it. We've talked about some of the other individual characters being dead. That's been an idea for a while, kind of floating around the community. And we get this Rebirth trailer, and we get what appears to be our characters being dead. So I think there's something to this. If we take, like, the ending of Remake, take the ending of the original FF7, take the beginning of this new Rebirth trailer, I think a lot of it adds up, man. I think in the past we've also talked about the Marlene ending thing with Remake, and maybe, like, her sensing, like, Barret and our group, like, hop into a different timeline. There's probably still a possibility of that too, but I think more so these days, I'm of the belief there's, like, one timeline, like an altered timeline, right? Like, we went from Beagle timeline to Terrier timeline. There's not necessarily two timelines that are parallel running next to each other, sort of thing. So I don't know that it's necessarily that, but I don't know what else Marlene would be sensing at the end of the game if it's not her father in the live stream, joining the live stream, or whatever the fuck. At least in this altered timeline where they would have died, right? And again, our Barret's alive. We're in the singularity. We're protected from the changes. In this altered timeline, this Terror timeline, Barret died, and maybe that's what Marlene is sensing. So of course, I want to pass off to you guys what are your thoughts on this. It's kind of fun to revisit, like, old theories and stuff with, like, newer information. But also, I do want to, like, revisit the beginning of the trailer, like, one more time. Probably, like, one last video talking about the beginning of the trailer before we get to, like, the next trailer that's ever going to release for, like, Rebirth, right? Like, I don't want to keep harping on this trailer in the beginning specifically, but there are some details people pointed out that I think we need to discuss that we haven't really talked about yet. But of course, what are your thoughts on this? On the Barret is dead theory. What do you think? Do you think he is dead, at least in the alternate timeline? Is that what Marlene is sensing? And if that's not the case, if you don't think that's what's happening, what do you think is happening with Marlene at the end of Remake? Because there's something there. She's sensing her father for some reason, but maybe we just don't know what that is yet. Good dudes, that is the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @YT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.